Israel is indeed committing a genocide and that you had to say so in an official report?
That immediately reminded me of the Rwanda genocide where I was a judge.
The inescapability of the slaughter, of the starvation. There is nowhere safe. There is nowhere to be evacuated to.
Even toddlers were shot right in the head by Israeli snipers as they were traveling on those routes.
It was systematic. It was directed towards humiliation of the victims that indicated an intention to destroy the sense of identity.
Doesn't the Genocide Convention say that other countries have to therefore step in to stop the genocide?
Yes, you're quite right here. It's not a choice, it's an obligation that states have to under the genocide, and they all are parties to that.
If Israel gets a lot of attention, it's because there is no other situation on the planet where the UN has been so intimately involved from the beginning in the circumstances that have given rise to and perpetuate the current crisis. So it has no choice but to be involved. Netanyahu, like everything he says, is simply lying.
One is occupy and the other is occupied. They are not equal.
Israel is committing a genocide. That's not just according to me, but to Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, and even Israel's own human rights group, B'Tselem. And today, an independent inquiry from the United Nations too. In a new report from the UN's Independent International Commission of Inquiry on the Occupied Palestinian Territory, UN Commissioners Navi Pillay, Chris Sidoti, and Milun Kathari officially concluded that since October the 7th, 2023, Israel has been committing genocide against the Palestinians of Gaza. And those same commissioners are set to resign soon, as was announced this summer, amid the US's escalating attacks on the United Nations. I'm joined now by two of those commissioners. Navi Pillay is the chair of the commission. She also served previously as president of the UN's International Tribunal for Rwanda and on the High Court of South Africa under Nelson Mandela. Also here is Commissioner Chris Sidoti, one of Australia's most prominent human rights lawyers. Thank you both for joining Zateo to talk about this major report. Your office, Chris and Navi, has already released 6 other reports about the violence in Gaza. What was it about this report that finally led your commission to conclude that Israel is indeed committing a genocide and that you had to say so in an official report?
Well, firstly, we were working on this matter for the past 2 years, and most of the factual findings that are included in this report appear in our reports. Each time we investigated an issue, an area, we published that report. It's that now we gathered all those facts together, then studied the law, looked at the intention, looked at utterances of the leaders. So that's what made us conclude that genocide is occurring. In other words, we led by the facts first and then the utterances. Unlike other people who like the sound of the word genocide, it's sensational, it's a media word. This is the way a court would approach it, and that was our approach. Don't you think so, Chris?
Very much so. It is, as Navi says, the product of all the work that we've done to date. So, Mehdi, it's not a matter of us suddenly deciding that we would examine the issue of genocide, but rather we have been leading up to this point by collecting the necessary basis to form an opinion.
So let me ask you about some specifics in the report. It was quite a shocking report to read. I have a few specifics to ask about, but before I get to my specifics, I just wonder for you two personally, as people who have worked on this issue, but human rights issues around the world, what stood out to you most? What would you flag in this report for people to look at that really shocked you both as you were finalizing this report?
Well, many things shocked me, but since you want me to zero in on, like, for the treatment of children, the amputation without anesthetic, I can't live with that. That will haunt me forever. But it's when I came to the deliberate shooting of the single standing building where the fertility clinic was and the embryos, and why would they go for that? What has that got to do with defense and looking for Hamas? That immediately reminded me of the Rwanda genocide where I was a judge and where they ripped the bellies of pregnant women pulled out the uh, fetuses because they wanted to kill off the entire Tutsi group so that future generation wouldn't know what a Tutsi looked like, to quote them.
Liking this video? Then don't just watch, hit like, share and subscribe. And tap the bell so you never miss a video or live show. But if you want early access to exclusive content, then you have to head to zeteo.com and subscribe now. You'll be supporting fearless, independent journalism.
That stood out.
You think you can draw that analogy? You would draw that analogy because people get very upset when you draw that analogy, but you obviously are someone who knows about Rwanda more than the average person. You were on the Tribunal. The Guardian and 972 magazine recently got hold of a leaked Israeli military intelligence database, which you reference in the report. 83% of people killed in Gaza, according to Israeli military intelligence, were civilians, right? Not combatants. This is according to the Israeli military intelligence themselves. And when the Guardian totted that death rate, that civilian death rate, you have to go back to the 1990s, according to the Guardian numbers, to find a death rate worse than 83%, and that is Rwanda. So would you, as a UN commissioner, draw a link between the Rwanda genocide and the Gaza genocide?
I wouldn't say one is worse than the other. Not for the victims, it isn't. It's their personal suffering. Where we drew from the experience of the first judgment on genocide delivered by the court that I served on is to see how you view the evidence and how you find the genocidal intent. So that was important, a combination of those two. That I found happened in the genocide in Rwanda. You just asked what stood out for me there. So you see, some acts are so horrendous that you can never forget them. So we came across many here. The imposed famine, the withdrawal of food and water, and now the destructions, the fact that people of Gaza had nowhere to go. The Hutus, Hutus in Rwanda could go to neighboring countries. Here they couldn't go anywhere else.
So on that note, Chris, throughout this war, Israel has repeatedly defended its killing of civilians by pointing to their evacuation orders. We tell them to move. We tell them to get out of the way. That's the Israeli defense. Your report basically debunks that defense. It says, quote, Palestinians, including women and children, were directly targeted and killed along evacuation routes, even in the absence of hostilities. You add that even toddlers were shot right in the head by Israeli snipers as they were traveling on those routes. The evacuation orders have basically been a death trap, have
they
they
have
not?
certainly been a death trap. We found, as you've described, killings along the evacuation routes. But in addition, killings in the places of sanctuary towards which the people were directed to go, forced to go. So large numbers of people have been killed in schools where they were taking refuge, in the grounds of mosques and churches where they were taking refuge, in tent cities that have been constructed amongst the rubble or on the sandy beaches. There is nowhere safe. There is nowhere to be evacuated to. And that's the great significance of the last point that Navi raised a moment ago, the inescapability of the slaughter, of the starvation. It's not as though the 2 million people of Gaza could go anywhere else. And yet for 2 years now, these captured people, trapped people, have been subjected to massive bombardment from the sky, tanks and other artillery shelling operating within the area itself, and troops, the snipers that Navi described when talking about the targeting of children. So you asked Mehdi, what really struck us? I think what struck me is the difference from any other contemporary situation of warfare that I know, in that the people cannot escape. Millions of people went from Ukraine into Poland and Germany. Millions of people went from Syria into Turkey. The Tutsis went into Burundi and to DRC and to Uganda. There is nowhere that the people of Gaza can go to escape this slaughter. And yet the slaughter has continued for 2 years.
Chris, the Israelis will get very upset, and we'll come to them later in the interview, but since you mentioned the Rwanda example again, they'll get very upset to be compared to Rwanda. And they'll say, if we wanted to kill 1 million people, as happened in Rwanda, We could have killed, you've heard Netanyahu say this recently, we could have killed everyone in Gaza in an afternoon. That would have been genocide, not what we're doing. Chris, what would you say to Benjamin Netanyahu when he says that?
I
To you?
would
We could have
say
killed
that
everyone, but we didn't. So it's not a
Benjamin
genocide.
Netanyahu has absolutely no willingness to accept the definition of genocide drafted by the great Polish Jewish legal academic Lemkin in the immediate years after World War II. This was a man who had come out of the genocidal situation of the Holocaust itself. And when he reflected on what had happened, he developed the definition of genocide, and everything that we have said in this report comes within the legal definition of genocide, and indeed a very conservative interpretation of it. So
Yes.
Netanyahu, like everything he says, is simply lying. He doesn't want to admit the truth because he knows that to admit the truth has legal consequences for him personally.
Yes. And this is the 1948 Genocide Convention that defines genocide as a crime under international law. Navi, one of the most horrifying revelations from this report is Israel's deliberate targeting of Palestinian women and girls, specifically through sexual assault. The report documents the Israeli military forcing women to strip off their clothes in front of their communities, posting naked photos of female detainees on social media, even groping them. Do you believe that this is the Israeli military trying to claim some kind of, I don't know, horrible vengeance after all the accusations, many of them debunked, about Hamas sexual violence on October the 7th?
I found in my experience there is always a firm denial of sexual violence. It never took place. Some of those Rwandan leaders, I'm talking about the prime minister, for instance, were prepared to plead guilty to genocide, but not to sexual violence. And I wondered why that was. Well, how will they ever justify sexual violence in the middle of an armed conflict? I see the same kind of denial here. Uh, we were just horrified because we were looking at facts, we were hearing witnesses. Um, and that's what I've been saying in all my summing up of our report today is we first started with the facts. So whether we were looking at sexual violence or the denial of water and food and humanitarian aid, we studied all that first, and then looked at the utterances and and connected both. So there is a pattern of conduct of Israeli authorities and Israeli security forces, which show the
And
genocidal intent is the only reasonable inference. Sexual violence is a very important component of that. And sadly, very few investigations of and prosecutions of of conflict situations address the sexual violence. Women complain. Yeah.
so,
Go.
so last year, your commission, the UN Commission, released an investigation into Hamas's alleged sexual assault crimes committed on October the 7th. And you ultimately concluded that there were, quote, documented cases indicative of sexual violence. But then you went on to say that rape allegations could not be verified due to, quote, obstruction of its investigations by Israeli authorities. That's what your report said at the time. Why do you think, Navi, Israel was so keen on blocking you investigating rapes that they claimed happened on October the 7th? Was it because they knew that you'd also want to investigate the alleged rape of Palestinian detainees inside of Israel?
Well, they have full knowledge of what they perpetrated there, because it was they did it to all the people in detention as well, Palestinians in detention. Yeah,
Yes.
I saw this pattern in very many situations, and this is what the women's movement is complaining about. Sexual violence is dropped because they feel it's not as serious as the killings. One panel said so. Panel of 3 male judges said so on the Rwandan tribunal. So uh, a reluctance to address the sexual violence because that lets down the soldiers. Well, that's my impression. What do you think?
If I may, Mehdi, can I just tell you something happened a couple of
Yeah.
months ago? I was giving an interview to an Israeli radio program, and the journalist said to me, is your commission saying that I'm a sexual pervert? I served in the military. all Israeli men and most women serve in the military. Are you saying I'm a sexual pervert? And the answer to that was no. And in fact, that made the situation worse, in my opinion, because the evidence that we collected about the sexual violence was not that the sexual violence was being perpetrated by individual male soldiers for the purpose of sexual gratification. It was systematic. It was directed towards humiliation of the victims, and humiliation in a way, to go now to this genocide report, that indicated an intention to destroy the sense of identity, the respect, and the commonality of the Palestinian people. It was sexual violence used not for the purpose of individual self-gratification, but for the purpose of humiliation and destruction. And it was clearly part of standard operating procedures.
But just to clarify, the Israelis have been complaining that the UN hasn't taken seriously their claims that Hamas carried out sexual violence and rape. I just want to clarify with you guys, had you gone to Israel, had they let you in, which they didn't, you would have investigated both sides, but the Israelis chose not to do that.
And in fact, the report that we produced on the events of 7-8 October 2023 in southern Israel is still the most comprehensive UN report on that subject. We dealt comprehensively, and we found that the Hamas fighters and the other Palestinian fighters committed war crimes. And that included war crimes related to sexual violence.
But you couldn't verify rape because they wouldn't let you in to talk to any witnesses, alleged survivors,
and because their own forensics were so appalling. We had a lot of photos, digital evidence of the bodies of women. The bodies had been defiled. We could not establish whether the defilement came before or after death, whether it was accompanied by rape. Short of actually having proper investigation in Israel, which the Israeli themselves have not done, or giving us access to witnesses and to people, doctors who had conducted autopsies, we had no way of working out. We could tell that there had been significant, widespread sexual violence, but we could not tell the exact nature of it. And so we said that we could not establish either way whether there had been rape.
Navi, you write in the report that Israel should not only immediately end their military operations in Gaza, but that they should also, quote, make full reparation for the harm and damage caused to the Palestinians. What would that look like in practical terms? And is that accountability even realistic in this day and age where the US protects Israel in all international forums?
Well, that's a demand of the victims, and we faithfully included that. We have a good precedent. The provisional orders issued by the ICJ are very clear. It talks of restoring land. The ICJ was not even intimidated by what intimidates most people. Oh, how would you handle the settlers now? There's all these buildings. We have all these people. The ICJ is very clear in respect of the West Bank. Restore the land to the Palestinians.
And the question of reparations is something that we've barely started to look at. But it's a very important question because it's an issue that could impoverish the people of Israel for generations. Reparations are the responsibility of those who commit war crimes. And you just look, anybody has watched the deliberate, well-broadcast, boastfully broadcast destruction of residential tower blocks over the last week. The destruction of hospitals, which we have documented. The destruction of schools, which we have documented. The destruction of the entire infrastructure of the Gaza Strip. Those who are responsible for the reconstruction of Gaza are not the European Union or the United States or the Arab states. It's the perpetrator. And the perpetrator is the state of Israel. And this is going to cost tens of billions of dollars in the years to come.
So talking of other things that people are recommending, not your report, but I do want to get your take on it while we're on this subject of practical steps. Last month, the Independent Gaza Tribunal urged governments to bypass the UN Security Council, empower the UN General Assembly to authorize an armed intervention in Gaza, peacekeepers on the ground, boots on the ground of an international force to stop the genocide, with former UN Special Rapporteur on Palestinian Human Rights, Richard Falk, saying that failure to do so would result in a, quote, historic failure of humanity. Is that something you both would report? Given you're saying it's a genocide, doesn't the Genocide Convention say that other countries have to therefore step in to stop the genocide?
Well, I wouldn't support that's an unrealistic claim about bypassing the Security Council. We're stuck with what we have now. Of course, most of us were engaged in groups that are fighting that veto. But there's one thing that those 5 countries totally agree on is that they will retain the veto. They really agree on that.
But Navi, there is a legal obligation, is there not, for the world, the international community, to step in and prevent a genocide
Yes,
as
you're
it's
quite
occurring?
right here. It's not a choice, it's an obligation that states have to under the genocide, and they all are parties to that convention.
And Chris, there's a lot of talk about the US's role in Israel's genocide, funding it, arming it, blocking action at the UN. Navi's government, Navi comes from South Africa, which has led the charge on an international stage about genocide, taking the case to the ICJ, which is ongoing. Your government, Australia, is one of the many Western governments that have been quite supportive of Israel's military over the years, reportedly still supplying parts used in Israel's F-35 fighter jet, the claim their government denies. What do you make of Australia's role in all of this?
Australia is not a big country, but we have a role. And the message that I constantly try to convey in Australia is that we have obligations under international law. This should not be considered on the basis of whether our action would be effective or not. Any action from Australia will have an impact, but not a huge impact. But weighing the impact of action is not the issue. The issue is, what do Australia's international legal obligations require of us? And it certainly requires more than what has been done to date. The government has been too slow.
Let's talk about some of the criticisms of you and your report. So, for example, you do talk about Hamas war crimes. You mentioned Hamas war crimes a moment ago. The report says Israeli authorities have claimed their military operations in Gaza were conducted as an exercise of self-defense in response to the October 7th attack, yet their actions and their consequences indicated other motivations. A lot of people are going to say, well, you're treating October the 7th as a footnote. You're minimizing the scale of the atrocities that happened that day and the need for any Israeli government to defend itself, quote unquote. What would you say to those critics?
Well, on the 10th of October, we issued a statement condemning the Hamas attacks and saying that they've committed war crimes, crimes against humanity. That was a one-day event. Thereafter followed this attack that Netanyahu called vengeance at Hamas locations. And to everyone's horror, it just went on and on. There's no ceasefire up to now. So it doesn't mean to me that every time you have to kind of strike some kind of balance as if the parties are equal. They are not equal. One is occupy and the other is occupied. We dealt with the Hamas situation, did not hesitate one bit in setting out what we found out, including the sexual violence. And wherever it comes up, we repeat that they are accountable as well. But this commission didn't see the need to continually strike some kind of balance when we're talking about this the genocide committed by Israel. We don't see the need of bringing it, but many of the people who question us,
Yeah.
yes, they come up with that
So-
all the time.
So, Chris, another criticism, as I'm sure you're very aware of your commission and the UN Human Rights Council that you report to, that establish your commission, is that you are biased against Israel, that you are only critical of the one Jewish state in the Middle East, and you answer to a Human Rights Council that has members like Saudi Arabia in the past that are human rights abusers, and that there's a double standard here. What's your response to that criticism? I'm sure you hear all the time.
It's a criticism that we hear all the time from the state of Israel and its government propagandists, and from those in the United States that are unquestioning in their support of Israel. So it's not something that is a common criticism around the world. It comes from very, very specific identifiable groups. Look, my major response, Mehdi, is a historical response about the role of the United Nations. The United Nations in 1947 adopted Resolution 181-2, which decided to establish two states side by side in the old Palestinian mandate, Israel and an Arab state. And from that moment, the United Nations has been responsible for that area of the world. We at the UN started it off, and we at the UN continue to have responsibility. If Israel gets a lot of attention, it's because there is no other situation on the planet where the UN has been so intimately involved from the beginning in the circumstances that have given rise to and perpetuate the current crisis. So it has no choice but to be involved.
And they call us, Netanyahu said we are biased. I would prefer rather they tell us, where's the bias? Are you disputing any of these facts that we set out? It's interesting to me that has never been the response to any of our reports, to say you got this, didn't happen.
The Commission, Navi, is of course not the first to call Israel's actions in Gaza a genocide. Amnesty International did so in December 2024. Human Rights Watch accused Israel of committing acts of genocide during that same time period. Even Israeli rights groups like B'Tselem declared it a genocide this past summer. Some people might say, why did it take your commission 2 years almost to do the same?
You could include amongst those, you should include those, one of the most important reports by the Special Rapporteur on the Occupied Palestinian Territory, Francesca Albanese, who reported in March last year to that effect. These reports are very important, but our methodology is different. As Navi explained earlier, we start with our investigations. We have conducted them thoroughly. We have reported repeatedly. You mentioned, Mehdi, 6 reports we've done to date. And in addition to those, there are a number of other documents we have produced of lesser status. So for us, coming to this conclusion is the result of intensive investigation over a 2-year period, relying on nothing but what we ourselves have found. So that both makes this report different from the others. It doesn't mean the others are in any way inferior, but it's different from the others.
Yeah.
And it does mean that as a UN Commission of Inquiry, this report is more authoritative. It comes with more authority than others that have gone before it.
Since Trump came back into office, he has sanctioned several international officials for their work on Gaza, including ICC Chief Prosecutor Karim Khan, and even your colleague who you just mentioned, UN Special Rapporteur Francesca Albanese. Are you guys worried that this may happen to you now you're accusing Israel of genocide too?
Well, there's so much lawless activity, unaccountable activity. It could come. But I think it's the most improper thing to do, because we are being elected here by the Human Rights Council, asked to do this work for the United Nations without remuneration, which indicates our commitment to the position. So we should not be penalized for doing our job properly. In my case in particular, I've already announced publicly to the President of the Human Rights Council that I'm retiring. The US says their goal in imposing these sanctions are not penalizing people, but getting them to change their approach, to facilitate a change on our part, so we won't name Netanyahu, for instance. So there would be no point in sanctioning me. I'm leaving.
Well, on that note then, let me ask you this. Along with your colleague Miloon Kathari, the third commissioner, all 3 of you made headlines this summer when you announced that you'd be resigning from the commission, retiring. How much of that decision was influenced by your fear of Trump coming after you, or by the non-stop accusations against you from Israel?
No, absolutely not. When I joined, I said I would serve for 2 years because I was considering age. There was no pressure on the part of anyone on us, and there's no fear on our part. In fact, we recorded our resignation much earlier, before Francisca was sanctioned, right?
Yes.
So when I handed my resignation, Chris and Miloon did as well, but Chris indicated he's available to be reappointed. And I think that you did that to facilitate the fact that this is unlike other commissions. It's not a year or 2, and the council will never have the opportunity to address the membership of the commission.
Last quick question to you both. You have worked on conflicts. Sorry, Chris, go on.
For me, I've already paid the greatest price that I could pay for being on this commission. And that is that when I was offered the position, I knew that it was most unlikely that I would ever be able to go to Israel and Palestine again. And I love Israel and Palestine. And I've paid that price already. Nothing else can happen that is worse than that.
Fair point. Last question to you both. You have covered conflicts, wars, war crimes, human rights abuses, genocides across the world. Where does Gaza fit into all that? How much will you think about Gaza standing out from all of those violent episodes? I asked the UN humanitarian chief a few months ago the same question, and he said it's like nothing I've seen before. I've been to many conflicts. I've never seen anything like this. Where does Gaza fit into some of the horrors you've seen and covered in both of your careers?
Yeah, I agree. So it's a worst ever because of the way the UN is affected, multilateralism threatened, and there's no will on the part of states to at least agree to a ceasefire and stop this.
Yeah.
Gaza will be with me for the rest of my life.
Chris Sidoti, Navi Pillay, thank you so much for your time. Appreciate you taking time out for us.
Thanks you,
very
Mehdi.
much. Thanks for having us.
Did you like this video? Don't forget to subscribe to this YouTube channel and turn on notifications. For exclusive content and to support our independent, unfiltered journalism, head over to zeteo.com. Your support matters.